our esteemed set of panelists. We have with us Anjali Bansal, founder of Avana Capital. She is the chairperson of the Investment Council of Niti Aayog's Women Entrepreneurship Platform and advisor on FinTech. She was also appointed as the non-executive chairperson by the Government of India to steer the merger of Dena Bank with the Bank of Baroda. She serves on the boards of Tata Power, Bata, Siemens, Delivery, and has been a mentor to Lenskart, Nykaa, Darwinbox, Urban Company, in addition to LoanTap. Welcome, ma'am. We also have with us Mr. Kamlesh Gandhi, the founder, chairman, and MD of Mass Financial Services. He is a proficient and experienced industry practitioner with a brilliant track record. His expertise and guidance has led the company on a growth track that is bound to set a new benchmark in the industry. Welcome, sir. We have with us Mr. Mohandas Pai, the chairman of 314 Capital. Mr. Pai needs no introduction and has served in the areas of finance, accounting, information technology, human resource, education, social impact innovation, environmental conservation, communication, heritage preservation, and many more. He was awarded the Padma Shri Award by the President of India in 2015 and the Karnataka Rajyotsav Award in 2004. Thank you again for joining us, sir. Our session will be moderated by Mr. Anand Lunia, the founding partner of India Quotient. Mr. Lunia loves writing on startups, studying market opportunities, and helping entrepreneurs across industries. Earlier, he was a partner at Field Fund, known for its exits in Kawale and Redbus. He's also co-founded Brain Visa, an edtech startup, after graduating from IIM Lucknow. We are really grateful to you, sir, for agreeing to join us for the session.
Thanks, Tanvi. I think we'll start with opening remarks from MDP. Sir, we want to know from you what's happening in the world and how will our country, how will the world economy be impacted?
Thank you, Anand. Thank you, folks, for being here. The first thing about COVID-19 is the fact that it's impacted a larger part of the world than any event in the last 100 years, including the Spanish flu. More people are impacted, more countries are impacted than the First World War, Second World War, even though the world wars had a bigger casualty. So it is a very global event. It's once in a lifetime, once in a 100 years event, maybe. Now it has impacted the global supply chain of the world. After the Second World War, it was the OECD countries that dominate the world. Now China dominates the world. China is responsible for 24% of the global manufacturing, and all supply chain leads to China. So China shutting up in February and March exposed the frailty of the world. And now every country is thinking of reordering the global supply chain away from China. And Japan is spending $2 billion to get its companies home. And America is trying to get its companies home. So the future is going to be a world where the global supply chain will be much more diversified than it is today. This had a tremendous impact on the global oil industry. The global oil industry at $65 to a barrel was a $4 trillion industry. Now it's become a $2 trillion industry. World consumption was 100 million barrels a day. It's fallen by 30 million barrels a day. It's come up a little bit. Oil prices fell to as low as $15 for Brent and $10 for WTI. And sometime in the Mercantile Exchange, it went negative to $39 per barrel, primarily because people were scared the world is running out of storage. Oil is being stored in all tankers all around the world. And today, the oil price coming down to around $35 in the recent 1 week means that the budget of Saudi Arabia is in trouble. All countries are in trouble. The USA was the largest producer in the world at 13.5 million barrels. Now, many of those companies are going into insolvency. So this industry getting impacted will impact the whole world in future. Consumption may not come back because consumption will be weak for the next 2 years as global growth rates are down in a very, very big manner. Unemployment has shot up all around the world. The US has 35 million people unemployed, almost equal the Great Depression of 1929, and it may go to 40 million. UK has about 8 million. EU has a large number of unemployed, and so has all other countries. So I think unemployment is a massive, massive big thing. And then what about global growth? This year, IMF said in the beginning of the year, growth will be 2.5–3% of the $82 trillion GDP. Now they're saying it will be minus 2.5–3%. I think it will be minus 8 to 10%. So we could see $8 trillion of the world's economy shaven off. How did central banks react? Central banks reacted the only way they know, by reducing interest rates. The US Fed reduced the interest rate to 0.25%, UK to 0.25%. Now we hear of negative yield bonds being sold in the UK. We have seen about $2.5 trillion of liquidity pumped into the US market. And all around the world, interest rates have come down tremendously and capital is sloshing around. And we believe that the QE, the quantitative easing and liquidity go up for $5 to $6 trillion. The $7 trillion of liquidity after the global financial crisis had come down. Now it may go up again or almost double in the next 1 year as countries try to rebalance their books. So interest rates are going to be low globally. There's going to be a surplus of liquidity, very low growth, high unemployment. For the foreseeable future, it will take 2 or 3 years for the world to come back. How did governments react? Governments have come with $6.5 trillion of stimulus. US is $2.5 trillion, UK 365 billion pounds. EU is nearly $1 trillion, Japan is nearly $1 trillion, and other countries have come too. Because all of them want to save jobs, all of them want to kickstart the economy. So very large stimulus given by all countries. That means all countries are borrowing more money. So global debt for the G7 will go up tremendously. As it is before this crisis, out of $36 trillion of government debt, $18 trillion were negative. So globalization is now in retreat. People are asking questions, should we have globalization so much because it benefited China? And now they're saying that we have to put up barriers to protect our companies. So FDI is under protection in the EU. Japan is becoming protectionist. American President Trump has shut the doors for H-1B. He's suspended visas for about 2 months. And all around the world, people are talking, is it time to roll back globalization? So there is going to be an impact in that term too. The two big impacts which are positive are people's habits are changed. Everybody is locked up all around the world in most places. And they're now using digital to do business, to talk to people, to entertain themselves, to get education, to get health, to get food, etc. Suddenly habits are changed for everybody, including baby boomers, including Generation Z. Next, the environment seems to have healed. In the 2 months of shutdown, most places in the world have seen lower pollution. The skies are bluer, the air is fresher, water is cleaner. So now people believe climate change can easily be reversed if we shut down permanently. Of course, that's not possible, but there'll be demand from everybody to have a future which does not harm climate change. What about India? Well, India is in deep trouble. We have seen a large decline in the GDP. India's GDP is 205 lakh crores, supposed to grow by 10% a year in nominal term, 5.5%, 6% in real terms, 3.5%, 4% in inflation, 10%. That means we are supposed to add 20 lakh crores in GDP. Now the new numbers are saying that we could be 5% minus. So we could be 30 lakh crores down, 5% minus on 205 lakh crores, plus what we missed. So we have a bad year right now. And this quarter, April, May, June, we all know that April, nobody worked. May, we don't know. People are going to work a little bit. June is not going to be a big month. And this has had an impact in terms of large-scale unemployment. If you look at unemployment, there are out of 1.37 billion people, 170 million people are above the age of 60, 500 million are below the age of 20. So we have 700 million people, out of which 550 million people are working, out of which 250 million people are in agriculture. Agriculture is having a bumper crop. So there will grow by about 3.5%, 4%, and agriculture is 15% of GDP. Formal employment is 300 million, out of which about 10 million are government servants, 25 million are in EPFO and ESI. Formal employment is about 80 million. Out of 80 million, 445 million are contract labor, and most of them have been laid off. So today we have maybe 45 million people unemployed. And in all cities, we're seeing a migrant crisis where people are trying to go back to the villages. There are 72 million migrants as per Niti Aayog, Rajiv Kumar, out of which maybe 20 million, 2 crores may be wanting to go back. And many of them are not going to come back. So we're going to see a new normal in India. So this year is going to be a year of low growth and negative growth and maybe low inflation. So what has government done? Well, the RBI has come and reduced interest rates. Just yesterday, they reduced by 40 basis points to 4% for the repo rate. Reverse repo is 3.35%. They pumped in liquidity of 8 lakh crores into the market. And sadly, all the liquidity is in reverse repo because banks are not lending. Banks are not lending because they're scared of NPAs. And then we are seeing that the government has come with a 20 lakh stimulus, inclusive of 8.5 lakhs crores that the RBI has given. 3 lakh crores for MSMEs with guaranteed loans. And they've also given 2.5, 3 lakh crores to agriculture. And they brought in much reforms. For the first time, farmers are free to sell wherever they want. Essential Commodities Act has been amended. and 1 lakh crore is being spent on farm gate infrastructure. The defense industry, the MRO industry, and the airline industry and other industries are getting reformed in a big way. Much of the reform which was not there earlier is being done. Now, government is very active and hopefully will come out with more stimulus. Some areas have been set out, not been addressed, like the middle class, like the airline industry, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, etc. Because the largest shock to the world has been the services industry. The second largest industry in the world is the tourism industry in terms of employment. All around the world, it has been shut down. And the largest employment is in tourism, aviation, airports, and in travel, etc. And that industry too has a great impact on India. But sadly, there has been no stimulus for them. Hopefully, government will do something else. So is India going to benefit by this? Quite possibly, because of 2 or 3 reasons. One, the global supply chain may get reordered. That means more of manufacturing from China may come to India. It's gone right now to Vietnam, 95 million people with 1,200 kilometers border with China, easy to ship. Some of it is going to Bangladesh for garments. Hopefully, some will come to India. The Japanese are eager to come to India. The Koreans want to come to India, but it's going to take time. It's up to the state governments and everybody to go get the business in along with industry. I think industry should set up contract manufacturing and tie up with the big brands to boost it here. Second, importantly, people's habits have changed. Now, all of you, maybe in the digital industry, in the startup industry, habits have changed. We are seeing that e-commerce has boomed in India, even though they've been shut down for a lot of time. We have seen education boom. Byju's subscription has gone up 2x, 6 million in a matter of 1 month. Others, Vedantu and all others are also going up. We have seen telemedicine shoot up in a very big way. Specialists are now talking to patients via Zoom or otherwise. And we have seen education for children, where children get up in the morning, dress up, put the uniform, sit in front of a tablet and do their classrooms. Senior citizens and others who have got idle time are on Zoom, are seeing movies. Hotstar has gone up, Netflix has gone up, etc. Banking is being done to electronic channels. And everything that we do to interact with the outside world is being done to electronic channels. So I think the way we go ahead in future is going to change. And everything is going to change. What we thought 5 to 7 years will happen is now happening right now. So when you look at the future, we cannot look at the past for any kinds of indications as to what the future will be. The future may be fully digital. The future may have less competition. China may start dumping in case China does not grow. There'll be surplus liquidity around the world. There'll be protectionism. And we are going to enter a new world. By 2025, it will be an entirely new way of doing things, looking at things as we do from now. So I will stop here, Anand, by just saying that the world has been impacted deeply, economically, socially, and people's habits. India has been impacted deeply. And all the fault lines that we have in India, fault lines that the northern states of UP, Bihar, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan have surplus labor. They always work outside. And now they're going back. And the failure of governance in many of those states in the past and lack of growth and opportunities is showing us the real face of India. We're seeing many helpless people trying to go back home, fleeing from what they know not. And we have to see how this pans out, what government will going to do. But I think India had a shutdown, and I think that we don't have a COVID vaccine right now. It will take a long time. So we have to learn to live with the COVID and hopefully minimize the risk. So Anand, over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Pai. I think, I'm getting 2 quotes from the World War I. In fact, that probably was the biggest event in the world, which was similar to scale in this kind of impact. One was from Lenin, which was, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And the other quote is from Winston Churchill, never waste a good crisis. Kamlesh bhai, do you want to add something in terms of never waste a good crisis? What do you think India should be doing in terms of not wasting this crisis?
Thank you, Anand. So I would like to start with an optimistic note that we are well versed with all the challenges that we are facing and we might face. But let us believe that this will be shared by, if it is India, by 135 crores people, and if it is world, by 7.8 billion population of the world. So we need not worry unnecessarily more about what is going to happen to me particularly. I'm just trying to step in the shoes of an individual who feels like when they see so much of news and so much of information coming as to what will happen to me the next day. So on an optimistic note, and much on that how to use the crisis. See, the basic human instinct for anybody, the basic human instinct is survival. So post the crisis, you will see that every individual will try to give their best. They will work in an extraordinary fashion, and that is what will bring about a lot of transformation, lot of adaptability, new innovations, discoveries, the new order of living, working, and so on. So that is how we can use this crisis to the best of our advantage. We can't extrapolate any of the past crises, but we have seen that there is no crisis which has defeated humanity. Every time we have overcome it, maybe in a shorter, in a medium to some of them might have taken more time. The very point that we are interacting right now is the fact that we have always overcome crisis in the past. So we can use this crisis to our advantage by becoming more determined than what we were ever before, by trying to learn new things and new techniques of coping up, then surviving and then growing and thriving. If every individual has this determination, then individual together will make about a good organizations, good corporation, good societies, and at the end of the day, in the medium to long term, will cope up with this crisis. So that while there are a lot of challenges, as an individual, we should magnify the possibilities what we have in front of us and try to give our best and see to that how we can look at one link of a chain at a time and see to that how we can be optimistic, because being optimistic is our best bet.
I admire
so this is how you can use the crisis to your advantage and overcome it.
I admire the optimism, Kamlesh bhai, particularly for an NBFC that you run. I really admire the optimism.
We have learned to be optimistic. Otherwise, I would be in front of you running for 25 years. Had I not been optimistic, I would not have been in front of you. So, particularly in NBFC, just I take 2 minutes. With this, if I give a short brief that right from 1995 to 2020, we have crisis every 3 to 4 years, and that to existential crisis.
Yeah.
And every time we have to learn that we have to be more determined and we have to find our way. And once again, I will repeat that what you have to magnify the possibilities and find out what best can be done, and be more and be more competent. I will not say God forbids for another crisis, but become more competent to face the future.
No. Good points, Kamlesh bhai. I'll come back to you, however, for specific comments on financial services as a space later. Moving on to Anjali. Anjali, Mr. Pai spoke about supply chain disruption, right? Now, how are you seeing, and what would you say that companies should do in terms of organizing their supply chain? There is, on one end, there is a very, very light model by Unilever that they're operating in India, no factories, no warehouses, no stock, nothing, right? That's one end of the model. And there would be another end of the model, like you were saying earlier, ITC, which is like a full stack model, their own warehouses, their own factories and everything, right? Where do you think the country is going? And is a change going to be positive in terms of, India becoming a manufacturing base?
It's a huge question, Anand. I will attempt.
Yes. No. I will add more if you skip something.
Sure. So supply chain, and I think there's supply chain of goods and there's supply chain of money. Capital also has a global supply chain. And in the last, I would say 30 odd years, we've actually seen increasing diversification and global linkage of these supply chains. If I look back to our last crisis that the world faced, so to speak, say the GFC, the global financial crisis. Now, as termed, it was actually only a financial crisis. And India at that time, while not insulated, was relatively sheltered and protected. The current crisis is not just a financial crisis. It's actually a crisis at all levels. It's social. Of course, it's health to start with. But deriving from that, it is a social crisis. There is an financial aspect to it, but the underlying economy is actually quite severely impacted, both on the demand and supply side. Now, if you recall, in the early days of the lockdown, the first focus on everyone was, how do you get your grocery? So actually, if you think about it, your atta, dal, chawal, etc., is the basic supply chain that comes to that. But going back to what is happening to companies, how are companies thinking about it? Earlier this year, when it was only China and Wuhan impacted with something that we kind of were starting to become aware of in December, January, called COVID-19, we said, okay, it's one more, Chinese thing. Now, of course, in the last 30 years also, we've gone into this just-in-time inventory, lean manufacturing, lowest cost manufacturing. my past firm and many others, I used to be at McKinsey earlier, we've all kind of advocated to our clients how to build lean. So in January, I noticed that a lot of my companies that I'm involved with, as well as others, started saying, okay, so how is this going to interrupt our supply chain? Will it lead to stockouts and shortages and so on? And then, by the time February rolled around, we were like, no, it's actually going to be okay. They're coming back online. Not knowing that within a month, most of the world would actually shut down. Today, the discourse and the dialogue in boardrooms and senior management discussions has moved to, do we need to rethink this completely diversified outsourced supply chain model? I'm not saying that we are actually going to roll back everything that's been done or massively shift, but at least there's a dialogue. And the dialogue is coming from how do you secure your essential components? So take in pharma, for example, right? So in pharma, you may not be importing anything from China, but all the APIs, China is the largest manufacturer of APIs. So how do you decrease your exposure to any one particular geography? Then it goes from there to saying, okay, let's get out of China alone and so on and so forth. But do we need to onshore, nearshore, if borders close, if you have stoppage of freight? So for essential critical components that could actually halt your entire supply chain, it may be a small widget, but it has the power to do that. Do you onshore? Do you nearshore? Implications thus on cost, working capital, inventory, and so on. And then where does that cost go? Does it get passed on to your customers so you have increase in prices, or does the company take it, gets passed on to shareholders? So I think these are all going to be fairly large conversations as we go forward. I don't know what the right model is. I would hesitate to say whether it's the Unilever model or the ITC model, but I do know, and I think that this discussion that has started will continue. One mentioned that Japan is spending a lot of money, actually $2 billion they're giving as incentive to bring manufacturing back onshore. The US has been talking about bringing manufacturing back. As manufacturing itself becomes more and more automated, the dependence on labor efficiency and thus low labor cost locations will also reduce. And I think you asked a question also about does India have an opportunity in manufacturing? I think India,
so actually there are two parts to this. One is, of course, Indian companies bringing back their own manufacturing, which will be great. And the other part is that India benefiting as a manufacturing for
absolutely. I'll address both.
Yeah.
So India has had a manufacturing opportunity for the last 2 decades. It's nothing new per se, right? But we've done, like most other economies in the world, we've gone to lower cost locations and so on. So there is certainly this question of Indian companies make in India, bring back incentives to set up. And you always hear about the hurdles there, right? Labor, land, and so on. To a large extent, one hears from the large manufacturers that land is no longer such an issue.
Right.
You can actually work around it. And labor is no longer such an issue as it used to be. Land continues to be something that is an issue. The real opportunity, of course, and we've been now, not just China, but even otherwise, is to attract global manufacturing to India. Some interesting anecdotes that we are starting to see is Chinese manufacturers themselves, some of our own contract manufacturers coming to our companies and saying, can we set up a JV with you in India? Because they are facing sanctions and trade blocks with the US, with Europe, with Japan. And so they are looking at India as a manufacturing base. Now, obviously, yes, there is an opportunity, but it is our opportunity as a country and as a business ecosystem to capture or lose.
Yeah. Or probably it's ours to lose to it, probably, right?
It is actually, yes. If you want to be specific, yes, it is ours to lose.
Yeah.
And I say this holistically as an ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's not just government, it's not just industry altogether.
I also feel, Anjali, that in the last 20 years, the best of our brains, haven't really, entrepreneurial brains haven't really thought of doing manufacturing, right? It is either been IT or startups, or it has been financial services, right? And in both of these fields, we have very, very good quality entrepreneurs, but probably we haven't seen as many good quality entrepreneurs going into manufacturing as a space. Mr. Pai, the very popular question, before and right now also going on in the Q&A forum, what is the impact of, what is government doing in terms of entrepreneurship? People want to know about this China FDI also, right? And in general, is this a good time? Because not just startups, Mr. Pai, a lot of kids, Kamlesh Bhai will probably know, a lot of kids are staying back in smaller cities now and starting businesses, right? Younger generation.
Anand, let me talk about manufacturing, then I'll talk about China and what is
Sure.
happening.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, in manufacturing, if you go to China, a lot of the manufacturing is done by Chinese companies. They're contract manufacturers for the global majors. Why is that? You want to sell across the globe, you need a supply chain, and you need to have a brand. Now, Indian companies have not built a brand, and they got, it costs a lot of money. But what Indian companies can do is to become large-scale contract manufacturer, like Dixon has become contract for electronics, etc. Like Hindustan Lever has got many contract man and scale up. Because by doing that, you get the benefit of scale, you get the benefit of automation, lower costs, you understand how to have good quality, and you build a supply chain because you need volumes.
Yeah.
If your volume is limited by your own country, you have a problem. Now, China's volumes is the global volume, not China's volume. After all, the local consumption in China is only 45% of GDP. So I think our Indian entrepreneurs should look at becoming contract man the big way, and then use the learning to develop their own products and to sell under their own brand. For example, Havels in Gillot has set up a fully automated robotic air conditioning plant. Except the compressor, they make everything, and the cost of production is competitive to China, is getting better than China with better quality. So they're able to do it because with automation you can do it. So that is a great opportunity for Indian manufacturers to do it. The second thing right now is, yes, the government of India was trying to protect India from getting captured by China. They captured a lot of our unicorns, you know that, and they didn't want money to come here to take companies on low valuation. So they did it. But we have been talking to them to say, you have shut down 8 billion out of 60 billion that came to us in the last 6 years. We need the money. And why didn't you open up the insurance industry for us? Insurance gets 7 lakh crores of capital every year. They got a balance sheet of nearly 50 lakh crores. Why didn't you get them to invest? Why didn't you open up university endowments and charitable trusts to invest in AIFs? Why didn't you make things easier? Why didn't you abolish capital gains tax so that people can go and invest? Because capital gain tax only has long-term 67,000 crores of income declared in 1819, as against 45 lakh crores of total income declared for taxes. It's very small. Why didn't you do that? So we're talking to government. Government is listening. We hope that Prime Minister Modi will listen and do something, because shutting out China is the easy thing. What about an alternative? We need the money. We're a capital short country. And you know that only 10% of the 60 billion that we got in the last 6 years has come from India. So I think we got to do more. And that means we have to get your voice heard. But till then, I think, raising capital is going to be difficult. But overall, I'm very optimistic, because I think this year we have to spend a lot of money on infrastructure. Spending money on infrastructure will accelerate the purchase of commodities and employment. Yeah. And if we do things this year, apart from the stimulus, then next year could be a great year, and we could bounce back to 5.5–6%, and we could be the fastest bounce back anywhere. And from then, we can zoom for the next 4 to 5 years. So I think in this crisis, we have to take an opportunity to invest more, to start our work. And I think we'll come back to 50–60% capacity by September, October. So I think this is the right time to change India. Modi 1 cleaned up India. Modi 2 should make India more productive now. Now, labor has gone back, that is true. So I think more automation will take place in the bigger cities. And I foresee a shift of labor-intensive industries from the big cities to the smaller cities. Now, if you go to Dharavi, there are a lot of cottage industries. Why should people come from outside, stay in the slum in Dharavi and do all that, right? Yeah. They can do it 50 kilometers outside Bombay. Yeah. Why can't they have garments in, in Lucknow or Patna covered by a road? Why should it be in Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore? So I think we got to rethink. Our mistake in industrial policy has been, we have not been able to incentivize labor-intensive industries. We incentivize capital-intensive industries in a labor-surplus country. China incentivized labor-intensive industries, and they did very well.
That's true. I think, Mr. Pai, some of the policies by a few states around easing labor regulations, hopefully they will help.
But Anand, what is required is better marketing, Anand.
Yeah.
See, what can central government do? They got all the policies, right?
Yeah.
Now the state government should go meet those people along with industry, people like you who are a good face, and Anjali, they must go meet and enthuse them to come and say, come to India, we'll help you out. And we can help you set up factories. Because if industry goes along with state governments, it can work. The states have to go. They have to market. For example, Singapore came up because the Economic Development Board, which is the main marketing wing, right? Yeah. We need an Economic Development Board, not the bad units that are there in every state who come and talk to you about industry and don't do anything for you.
That is true. Okay, I'll shift to Kamlesh Bhai. Kamlesh Bhai, what do you think that RBI wants to do in this financial services space, right? I mean, I find very, very confusing signals as to how do they want to design the money transmission system. You know, there are probably the number of banks is shrinking every year, as you know, right? And their policies seem to be like the number of alternative lenders, you know, that there also they want to shrink, right? And at the same time, you know, what's happened is that the general comfort of depositors is reducing every year. It's a very sad state, right? So what do you think is like, what is going to happen to the financial services industry, and what is the future there?
See, as I understand from the RBI perspective, they're pretty clear that for the last mile delivery of credit, NBFC will play a very important role. And there should be a very robust value chain, right from a large bank to a large NBFC to once again a smaller NBFC, creating a very robust value chain to reach to the ultimate borrower. Because country like India, which is so diversified and so informal, the people closest to the ground are the strongest. So it is not about how much, what is the size of my balance sheet. It is about how I know the demography where I need to fund. So I think that has been sufficiently been taken, understood by RBI, because they are trying to support NBFCs in all the possible manner, in the best possible manner they can and they know. If I tell you that in past we always had to fight with RBI for our existence, that we do exist and we are important part of the value chain and we add value in the credit dispensation. From that point to this point where RBI recognizes the role of NBFCs, that they play a very important role in the last mile delivery of credit, and hence they are coming out with various new schemes to give liquidity to NBFC. Maybe practically there are few hindrances here or there. That is what that we were discussing before we started. That the basic problem with any government is resources and micro understanding of each and every business. They can't understand each and every business, the nuances of each and every business in a micro manner. So there is going to be some disconnect as to what we want and what we have got. So that can be solved through constant dialogue with them and through our performance, whereby we show that this is what we are capable to do in terms of last mile delivery of credit. So it is a two-way traffic where NBFCs will have to prove their performance in the last mile delivery of credit, and at the same time there should be enough recognition from the bigger lenders and RBI about their role. So once this is a process, this is a task we worked upon. It can't happen overnight. But if I tell you as a practitioner, it is improving over a period of time.
Oh, okay.
From time where we were fighting for a basic recognition to a time where we are talking about a special liquidity window for NBFCs and the lower rated NBFCs being recognized. To me is a very, very big development in our history as far as we have seen over all these years.
Oh, okay.
If I may add to what Kamlesh Bhai just mentioned, I think there is a recognition and appreciation for the very significant contribution that NBFCs make to the development of both MSME and entrepreneurial sectors, as well as the last mile lending and linkages. Last mile, of course, being MFIs, both rural and urban and so on, but also recognizing that in some ways the large banking ecosystem, the large banking system is no longer supplying the capital and support to MSMEs and small businesses as it used to. So NBFCs are actually sort of delivering a very important service to at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So the low tech, less digital MSMEs and borrowers of that ilk, as well as the very high tech, digitally enabled millennials who all the fintechs cater to. I think there is absolutely a recognition of that, and I quite concur that we just have to work through it, and in some ways, as a segment, NBFCs will also have to show that there is much more credit discipline than perhaps before.
True. I think one more question to both of you, Kamlesh Bhai and Anjali. Maybe Mr. Pai also has a view on this. The big elephant in the room has been real estate, right? For the last few years, probably since the last financial crisis in 2009, we've been saying that real estate is heated, and we felt some plateauing in terms of prices and a lot of inventory increasing in the last few years, but the prices were not really dropping to inventory clearance levels. Do you think that this Corona crisis is going to be finally the pin that breaks the bubble in real estate?
So the segments which were already facing liquidity crunch, there is no doubt about it that they will face more problems because of this, because they were already under pressure as far as demand is concerned. The demand was low, and we don't do much of the real estate funding. But what I see is that there is lot of the working by real estate operators has not been so professional in terms of how they take up the projects. We in our affordable housing finance business, we deal with number of small project operators whereby we see that they have hardly any understanding on the financial closure, on the demand, on the supply. They do much because of what they think through their instinct. So that is where that was the root cause of the problem, that much was done unprofessionally. Barring few of the large real estate companies, majority of the small time real estate operators were doing it not in that professional manner, and that too more precisely from the financial closure point of view, and that is the origin of this crisis. This is what I understand, and because of all this pandemic and all, I think that is going to put more pressure on them, unless they get the as it is demanded that they get a one-time restructuring benefit, unless the demand picks up and they also correct their style of operations and understand the finances in the way they should understand in a more prudent manner. So along with the help from the government, and they have to help themselves to come out of this financial mess.
Yeah, it looks like a tough one there. Anjali, you have any views?
No, actually very similar. It is not an easy one. There are several stranded large projects, and the sector also has to help itself with more discipline, and there does need to be a correction at least. And by no means an expert on real estate, but yes, that's what it looks like.
True. Okay, I'll
Anand,
yes,
I want to make a point.
Yes,
the problem with real estate is excess stocks. About
yes,
700,000 apartments are there not sold.
Yes.
Half of them not completed. Why is that? Because they're all been speculating the prices will keep rising every year, as what happened in the global financial crisis when they started giving money to everybody, including ninjas.
Yeah.
So now I think the time of reckoning has come, because there's going to be no easy money coming, because banks are washing their hands off. NBFC, which gave money, they're not going to give money because they discovered that there are NPAs there. They all thought it's a good place to make money. Reality has come in. So they must start selling out and restructuring, and many of them are gone into bankruptcy. So there's going to be a watershed here. But even though they are in trouble, the big issue for India is they're the second largest employer. Construction, real estate, second largest employer.
Exactly.
Now, government needs to step in to accelerate liquidity, the sale of all these assets, even at lower prices, rescheduling of good loans where they are. For example, some of us have spoken to government about giving them a bailout earlier. They set up a 25,000 crore loan. I spoke to somebody in that industry who was very senior and said, banks want to charge 16-17% priority over everybody else. Nobody's buying those loans. Nobody wants them. So they got the wrong model. So I think we need a quick model to save the industry, because we need jobs. If government can wash its hands off and say we're not going to interfere, but then jobs are not going to come. Because if all real estate stops, who is going to employ the skilled and semi-skilled where India has got large numbers? That is the big challenge.
Yeah, in fact, that is one sector which probably will take a very long time to come back. I mean, with or without Corona.
But it's actually not a crisis made by Corona at all. This was in the coming, and it's kind of the chickens have come home to roost. If I look at across the board, whether it is banks or NBFCs or frankly even debt mutual funds, the focus now has to be on credit discipline. So today, which is what we are seeing, we are actually seeing the pendulum swing the other way, where even though there is liquidity available, it is not being lent out. So we are just not seeing transmission. And it is actually, on the one hand, it's very convenient to blame the financial system and say the banks and the NBFCs are not lending. But on the other side, borrowers have not always covered themselves with glory with their credit behavior either. So, I mean, there are enough stories which we don't need to go into on sort of diversion of funds and just not being disciplined in use of capital.
I want to ask,
and just to add to it, the rate of interest is the function of the returns I get. We always talk about risk-adjusted returns. When we talk about 17% or 15%, it is about the risk what the bankers and NBFCs have seen in the past lending to the projects. And I will agree with Anjali that it is a responsibility of each one of us that how we assess. As a lender, it is more incumbent on us also that how we assess the project. As a borrower, you always have an aspiration to borrow. So the rate of interest are usually decided by the risk-adjusted returns. And for any sector to get it at a lower rates, they have to demonstrate their capabilities to borrow money and repay, and see to that their liabilities is the strongest asset in the books of the lender. This is what will give them a lower rate of interest.
I think Kamlesh Bhai is hinting at a churn of the players, basically, significant change in the behavior of the players in the industry, probably.
Oh, actually, absolutely. Both from the lender side, there is going to be such a strong focus on credit discipline, not just for your traditional lenders like banks and NBFCs, but even debt mutual funds. So debt mutual funds, for example, very few of them have a credit underwriting department, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on ratings.
Mostly depend on external ratings only.
And then, as we have seen, there is a question around, what ratings are reliable also. I think all lenders, whether you're lending through capital markets or you're lending through loans, will have to do their own homework. What's more work required? I
will ask just one question about the education sector, Mr. Pai. It's going through serious transformation. Will it be a painful transformation? Because, all of these expensive degrees of MBA, 20 lakh rupees and all of that, maybe people will resist spending in the short run. It's already happening in US also. Like you mentioned, Byju's is gaining in subscriptions. Somebody must be losing.
Nobody is losing so far, Anand, because please remember, schooling is a necessity for everybody. 12 years of schooling should be guaranteed by the state.
Okay.
So if you don't have money, the government should make sure you get 12 years saving, and that 12 years education, that is a necessity. And we have to pay for it publicly. And if we don't pay for it publicly, the future is not very good. We can't have a semi-educated society. Now, what about higher education? In higher education, we must distinguish between three factors. Community colleges. Community colleges just give you some life skills, an ordinary degree that every kid should go to. And we should publicly provide for that. We are not doing it. And we're suffering for it. For example, in Bihar, the gross enrollment rate is 13. 13, for God's sake, that state will never come up. I think Tamil Nadu is 49. 49 is very good. They're the best in the country. Now, the next important thing in higher education is the professional courses. There, I think the cost has gone up and we got oversupply, but now there's a shift to quality. And there we are seeing reform because we had a talk with the AICTE and they're saying we're going to have online, offline education, we're going to have technology, we're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And that's very good news because the quality is slowly improving. And the third will be the research-led institutions, where I think we don't have public funding for research, which has to be at the top of the pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is pretty weak. For a country of our size, we're not spending enough on research. So we are good at the bottom, we are good to semi-good in the middle. At the top, we are very weak. So I think for education, as far as concerned, B2B in technology education or in edtech business, B2B is going to be tough. B2C will succeed because in the school area, of the 265 million children in school, about 50 million children have parents who can afford to pay. That is a very, very big market. And in education, there are about 36 million, 3.6 crore students in college. There may be about 10 million can afford to pay. And now we'll see a shift to online, offline. And obviously, online education with good content, with good teaching, will tend to dominate more. And more colleges and schools will involve, hopefully, a lot of them in the business. Even though if you try to do B2B, these edtech companies may not make money. So we're going to see a shift, but the shift will be based on individual choice because the regulators are not going to give up easily. AICTE is very proactive. UGC is trying to be proactive, but all the state regulators, school board regulators, that is a tough bit.
Mr. Pai, will we see any privatization of education instead of it like being run through various shell structures and all of that? Any reforms in that?
Anand, we are trying to work for it, but there's a psychological bar in many of the political parties who think that education should not become business, and education has become a business. Many of those universities and colleges are run by political leaders, and they make it a business. They do all kind of stuff. We know that, and they refuse to recognize that. So I'm working. We are all working on that, but I'm not very optimistic it will happen in the near future. We wanted profit-based education to come up openly to say, so long as there's good education, why are you bothered whether it is not for profit or for profit? But then we have the Supreme Court which says education should never be commercial. Then we have a lot of this conservative education should not be commercial. Without understanding, it's already become commercial. And this attitude of saying it should not be commercial is harming the future of our children. Because parents always say, give me good quality, I'll pay for it, whatever I can. If I can't, the state should subsidize. And then it doesn't matter to me whether you are public, private, anybody else. The color of the cat doesn't matter.
That's true. That's true. I think education is probably the last place we'll see reform. It'll probably take a few, not in this government, this tenure for sure.
So there will be reforms, but not reforms to have profit so soon.
Okay.
No, actually,
we'll take audience questions.
Why do we need government reform actually? Yes, we can think about sort of higher ed and for-profit colleges and all of that will take its place and so on. Frankly, what we need right now is not more degrees, not more young people coming out with degrees, but actually coming out with useful skills that will get them either livelihood or employment. So the focus really should be around skilling and the online, offline delivery of skilling programs that get them into real jobs.
Yeah.
And what we call kind of the quote unquote gig economy. But actually, if you think about it, most of India's gig economy, manufacturing jobs, construction jobs, they're all skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled. And so you see companies like an Urban Clap, like a Delivery and so on that are actually formalizing large
Anjali,
parts
we are all
in
gig economy workers right now. You know,
we are, yeah.
everybody's job is certain and everybody is just.
No, so actually, if we want reform, we should push as an India. And I actually think there's opportunity there.
Yeah.
It may not be a quick flip venture
True.
opportunity,
True.
but there is definitely opportunity.
We'll take some audience questions here. Okay. So, yeah, one question is, want some speculation on how soon will the economy come back, specifically for a new entrepreneur starting today. What is the view on things coming back? Kamlesh bhai, maybe I can ask you this question. There's some people asking question about this space also. When do you think, you will be comfortable in terms of saying, okay, now I can lend with comfortable, like, with good confidence, like you were lending, let's say before December last year, when will the time come back?
I think soon after the lockdown, because it is not so that everybody is facing problem. All businesses are shut and nobody is working. So we sell to more than 9 lakh customers across geographies, and we see a lot of opportunities within our existing customers, and we will find out new ones also. And answering the question that speculation is always hazardous, so you need to focus on what you want to do and find your own way out, because you need to concentrate on your possibilities and just not worry about all the things happening in the world, because everything is not going to affect you. So as a new entrepreneur, if you're starting something new, just concentrate on your niche, see what best you can do, and there is always a good time to start a good thing. And if you are determined to succeed, you might face problems, but at the end of the day, you will find your own way and reach your goal.
Right. There's a question from Siddharth Roy on what kind of changes in consumption pattern, do we see in terms of fast-moving goods or other services also, and what patterns do you think will stick? Anjali, we are in this business of speculation.
No, let me speculate right along with you, Anand. We should do this together.
Absolutely.
So what have we seen? We have seen already that there was very little impact on demand for essentials. And so essentials will continue. In fact, and you've seen the stock market has also rewarded good execution on essentials. Mm-hmm. There are certain segments where demand has kind of gone to zero, and it is likely to stay sluggish for a long time for two reasons. One is for this physical distancing and health concerns and so on, but also because as economies start coming back online, there will probably be less disposable income. And these are particularly segments like travel, hospitality, and thus airlines, hotels, and so on. The rapid, dramatic shift to digitalization. So the fact that we are doing these kind of webinars and not spending 2 months trying to schedule something, but actually getting on with meetings, we'll actually see a lot less travel, business travel, not just leisure. So that will have an impact on the entire chain. We are seeing again, because, and sometimes, crises are wonderful things. They change behavior in positive ways. So again, the digitalization of education, of working, the work from home is actually because companies were forced to kind of promote virtual working and remote working, means that commercial real estate will now have to get reconfigured. There are large IT companies that actually employers of large people, also renters and owners of large commercial real estate and users of services. So whether it is catering service, transportation, and so on, they're saying, they'll only have 30% of the people come in to work at any given time. So that will have implications. So those models, that's where demand is not coming back anytime soon. But on the flip side, you will see things, you'll see home spaces getting reconfigured. You might see demand for better hardware and software. That will certainly be there. So yes, I will pause there. And there are some, I call them sort of the red lipstick products, which are small in cost, but make you feel good.
Okay. I
You know, Anand,
Anand, you should speak about this too. We want to hear what you want to say.
No, I'm very comfortable as a moderator right now.
No, we won't let you
Anand,
off the hook on this.
you know,
Yes, sir.
Anand, the one phenomenon that will happen now will be down trading.
Uh-huh.
See, today people are cautious about spending. They're not going to spend a lot of money because they want to save money. They're uncertain about the future.
Right.
So they could be down trading. So we could see many more business model innovations
Yes.
where a Maruti can come and say, I'll give you a car, pay me only 3,500, 4,000 rupees a month.
Yeah.
How are they going to subsidize this? They're going to take a hit on the profit and they're going to use their rating to get lower funding for 4 to 5 years and have a residual value large enough and take a risk. Like it happens in America where you can take a Volvo for $250, $300 a month. So I think we're going to see a lot of business model innovation happening in the future by stronger companies. I think Tata Motors said they're going to give one of the vehicles for 3,000 rupees a month or something now, right? Something we saw in the newspapers. And there'll be down trading. And that's why Reliance Jio is very important. Reliance Jio, by connecting itself to all the Kirana stores, will consolidate their orders, go to the big guys and say, give me 20% off. I'll give 1 million pieces, 5 million pieces. And I think today we are going to see a massive increase in volumes, but the prices will be lower. So I think we'll see more mass consumption happening in all kind of consumer durables and everything else, because the price points have to be lower to incentivize people and the repayment burden has to be lower. So that means lower interest rates. So I think industry has to learn to live with the new normal with the lower margins and higher volumes, with the only way out for them for the next 2 or 3 years.
And
I
but
think
Mr.
there'll be a lot less room for mistakes. So execution will be key for a lot of companies to survive.
And are you saying that the brands will then have to redesign to a lower price point?
I think so, because you see, today, tell me, will you go buy a 40 lakh car, a 50 lakh car? I mean, the people who bought a 40 lakh car will want to buy a 30 lakh car.
Yeah.
People who want to buy a 10 lakh car will say, I want 8 lakhs, correct?
Yeah.
Because, there is a fear of the future. Yes, we have to be optimistic. We will be optimistic. India will do well. There's no doubt India will do well. All of us will do well. The question is, it's going to take a little bit of time. Until that happens, we have to survive. So people are going to spend less. I mean, are you spending the same amount of money you were spending before COVID?
Far less.
The same amount of money in the next 2 months you are spending before COVID.
Yeah. Right now, actually, I think you are right. This fear psychosis, even if 5 or 10% job loss happens across companies, the fear will spread to everybody. Nobody's job is safe. And very good quality, good performers have been let go just because companies have liquidity problems. On that, I have a question to Kamlesh Bhai, and maybe Mr. Pai, you can also contribute. Mr. Kamlesh Bhai, as a organization culture, when people are working remotely, and if more remote work happens, what will be the big change in the culture? Because like managerial progress is defined by how big your cabin is and how much time you spend, a lot of social interaction and all of that, which lead to a particular kind of behavior. How will that be managed now?
So if that is changing, efficiency will be the hallmark to judge how the performance will be judged by how better you are performing. Do you wait from home or wait from the office? So that is what a big change is, because we never in the past used to assume that you can be at home and still put in around 8 to 10 hours of work, and that too over a period of time you learn to work efficiently. So at the end of the day, the parameters for judgment will be the outcome and the efficiency, and not and every other thing will take the backseat.
True. Mr. Pai, this
Can I add to that, Anand? I think there'll be a new skill set that will be required. So in cultures like ours, and India and Asian cultures, which are very high context cultures. So on the one hand, people want to give a lot of direction and structure in the face time, and people lower down in the organization want to receive a lot of direction and structure. Now with remote working, that is not possible. So managers will have to learn how to manage virtual teams, and people who are delivering the work will need to learn to kind of be more self-driven and still deliver work. So I think there is a learning curve that organizations will have to go through, both managers and the other way. And then the big impact, of course, this is in the short term, but the impact is on learning and apprenticing that happens when you work together.
Yeah,
That will take a
absolutely.
hit.
Yeah, that is shoulder to shoulder. Mr. Pai,
But I think it will make us more efficient and less, actually less context.
my
I think people will say what they
short
mean.
run, Anjali, in the short run, however, if you look at the impact on, in IT industry, sir, people used to say that, if there's 1,000 people company set up, there will be 3,000-4,000 other people employed, to run the buses, to do the security, to do the catering, housekeeping, etc., etc. Now, all of those jobs will be in jeopardy now, isn't it, Mr.
Yeah,
Pai?
they've been jeopardy because I believe the new normal will be 25-30% of people always working from home by rotation. I
Okay.
don't see it going up like TCS says 90%, 75% for a very important, 2 or 3 important reasons. Many young people stay in paying guest accommodation.
They don't
can't
have
work
space.
from home.
Yeah, they can't work from home.
And it's not possible. They'll leave
Yeah.
because they'll go
Yeah.
crazy. Right now
Yeah.
is a need.
Yeah.
And TCS and other IT companies don't pay very well for freshers. Okay, they pay them peanuts. So there's a problem.
Yeah.
And two, much of the project work that they're doing is important to have face-to-face interaction to check up your queries and all that. So part of the work has to be done. And third, more automation will also take place to remove human interaction. So I think 25-30% will be the new normal. And also in the office, some of the offices are very dense. Now you have to have social distancing in the office for the next maybe 24 months. That means if the office is capable of having 100 people, at best today in Mumbai, it can have 35 people. In Bangalore, maybe 50 people. Because social distancing means that you got to keep distance between one another. And Bombay is very, very dense. So that itself will make sure that a large number of people work from home in future. It's just that the IT industry discovered tools, cyber security, everything else to make it work. I mean, somebody made a remark in a talk like this that about 90% of people were shifted to work from home in 15 days. That is 4 million people. 4 million people shifted in 15 days, and they're saying productivity is 80% of normal. Some places it is more, but the human pain of the productivity is very high.
That's
The
true.
human cost is very, very high because all the people who have to be productive, they're working more from home, putting in longer hours because the output requires a lot of interaction, and that is difficult.
That's good to know because if 90% people start working from home, then a lot of other allied industry will collapse.
But allied industry will be hurt for the next 1 year.
Yeah.
We have to be real because I think traffic will come down in Mumbai, traffic will come down in Bangalore, and that's good news too. Pollution will come down, but some of the lower level jobs are going to be hurt. That's true.
Okay. Sir, should we take one more question because there are lots of questions now? I'm unfortunately, there are 28 questions.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll address this question of the disconnect between economy and stock market performance in India. And maybe another question, Mr. Pai, you can answer on, and Mr. Gandhi can also answer on this question. Do stock markets really play a role in the economy?
Anand, stock market discounts the future. So what are the market telling us? The market is telling us the future for these companies will be good. So pharma companies will be good. So the market price is up. IT companies have come down. They look attractive because there'll be a shift to IT and digital for a long period of time. Banking is down. Financials are down because they say the NPA risk is still too high. We don't know whether you're going to lend. So the market is discounting the future and finding a new price. So I think, we can't accuse the market of not knowing.
I understand, sir. I agree. But, are the stock markets particularly a good mirror of the economy right now?
They're not the only mirror. There are a mirror because the stock market is a result of the hopes, aspirations, and fears of all the players, right? See, the US market has come back to where it was before it fell 25%. Why is that? It's a huge surge in liquidity. And also the indices are getting concentrated. Now the Fang Man or something, some new stuff. On to 7
Amazon.
trillion, right?
Yeah.
7 trillion. They shot up. Amazon is 1.2.
Almost.
Can you believe 1.2, 1.3 trillion? So it's getting more and more concentrated in a fewer companies, which value is going up because of digital.
Yeah. I think Kamlesh bhai, you have any opinion on this?
Very true. So nothing more to add to this. But StockPipe, being a newly listed company 3 years back, while while it will be unfair on my part that I don't watch my stock prices, but I've learned not to be much concerned about it, because sometimes I think, but sometimes I think that they know more about my company than what I know about it. Maybe on the positive or the negative side. So I'll take it as a practitioner, as an entrepreneur. You should not be worried about what the stock market thinks about you. As long as you can deliver the value for your stakeholders, sooner or later you will be rewarded, because stock market functions on so many other parameters besides the fundamental. So you can say that to an extent it is not linked with only the performance.
No, that is a good advice, a good way of thinking, even for entrepreneurs who seek funding from VC funds, right? We are not able to appreciate most of the times the value in.
No, but Anand, Anand, if you look at the startups, many of them are missing one important thing, Anand, which I feel sad. They don't have good investor relations. Now, good companies talk to the investors. If you're unlisted, once a month, talk to them deeply once a quarter. They keep in touch. They go meet new investors, even if they don't want money, they keep in touch. So many of them ignore sending out communications, ignore talking to investors, keeping them in touch. They make you call them. Now, many of them are realizing that your best bet is people who are your existing investors.
Absolutely.
They don't know where you are. You're not kept them abreast. You don't talk to them. You don't reach out to them all the time. When you need money, they're going to be cold to you.
Yeah, it's a
companies
sad.
that get close are the companies which are, which will possibly grow and raise money. And they miss the wisdom of investors. For example, they can talk to you. They can talk to Anjali and get all the wisdom about how to run their business, how do they see the world, etc., and possibly reconfigure their model, right? They don't keep in touch. Then, they miss reaching out to people who know the markets well, who can advise them how to change the business model to meet the future.
No, I think, Mr. Pai, this is, I think, a good point about, in India, I mean, not just startups, in general, the entrepreneurs and the financial intermediaries, they have sort of an adversarial stance, right? I mean, both ways, I would say. I would say that, some investors and bankers have also been culprit to this, that we maintain distance. We have not really maintained cordial relationships where entrepreneurs can frankly speak with us, right? And actually open up to us about their problems and seek advice. It is more of a posturing thing on both the sides, unfortunately.
Yeah, but Anand, look, we must accept the investors who own the company. They have a right to information. It is their money.
Yeah.
For an entrepreneur who is having a stakeholder, you must communicate with the stakeholder, because you must jointly work together. I think it's a very, very big lesson for everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
See, it can either be mutually
absolutely.
assured destruction. It can either be mutually assured destruction, or it can be completely symbiotic. So whenever you take somebody else's money, whether you're a public company and you've got external shareholders, or you're an unlisted company and you have got private equity, venture, and so on, you are working with somebody else's money. And by the way, they are fiduciary also for other people's money that they are managing, right? All funds manage other people's money. So I think that recognition is an important one. And from the investor point of view, so from the VC or the fund point of view, I mean, after all, you're relying on the entrepreneur to be successful, to generate your returns and to make you successful. So actually, that recognition and humility also, that our success lies in the entrepreneur's success, not the other way.
Yeah. I think in general, entrepreneurs will learn a lesson right now, because, when they right now go and talk to their investors, existing investors, hey, can you help me out? They'll say, dude, I haven't heard from you for last 1 year or last 6 months, right? So.
And Anand, it will also change the business model. This idea of throwing capital at everything, blowing up money,
absolutely,
and a GMV, all that thing that went on and because to get higher valuation will go. Because if you don't have money for the next 6 months, you're gone. Who is going to fund you?
No, absolutely true.
They will ask for a lower valuation. So I think it's teaching people, keep enough cash in the balance sheet to meet 1 year's revenue expenditure without earning a single penny of revenue.
Oh, absolutely.
Cut your costs, don't shed your people, make sure that you change your business model and become more productive, become more efficient. Because at the end of the day, Anand, there are only 2 things that create value for companies. That is labor productivity, capital productivity. Capital has to be productive and your people have to be productive. That's the only 2 competitive advantage you got. That is what an entrepreneur is supposed to do, not blow up capital. Look at SoftBank. Blow up capital, throw money. Once they started throwing money, there's no more money to throw.
No, I think like real estate, a lot of those things are also being questioned, that they're facing their moment of crisis, and I think to that extent I'm very positive. Probably all of these companies should be starved once they grow beyond a certain stage. They should be starved of capital, and they should be forced to face the reality of public markets, right? You're forced to go
Yeah,
to
but
public.
Anand, greed and fear are what drive markets.
Well, I think
Anjali knows in
I
3
think
to
we are.
4 months time,
Hmm.
3 to 4 months time, there'll be a deluge of capital coming into
Totally.
India, hopefully,
Totally.
because interest rates are going to be very low. Deluge will come in, and the deluge will lift everything up, and we're going to be back to where we are.
We'll forget everything. Yeah, that's sad. That's going to
The
be sad.
issue is the tide has gone out right now. So when the
And there will
tide
be
goes out,
competition
everything
among the
becomes visible.
investors for giving higher valuations.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, the key thing is, Anand, are you
Uh,
going to be alive till then? So we
No,
must
no,
know
absolutely. I think
to stay alive till the
yeah.
tide comes in again. And
Yeah.
if you're alive and decent shape, the tide will take you up much higher.
No, absolutely. I think which is why the economy is going to face a little bit of a pain, because most companies are trying to be alive and really cutting down costs. Across the board, we've seen people take serious pay cuts right now. So hopefully some positives. Gentlemen, it was a great discussion. I think I have a lot of questions. I can't answer most of them. Thank you very much, Mr. Pai. A very engaging discussion. Thanks a lot. Kamlesh Bhai,
Thank you.
Anjali, perfect.
Anand, we
Thank you.
spoke about entrepreneurship. We have actually two great examples sitting right here. Kamlesh Bhai
Yeah.
and Mohan, they've created companies that have
Absolutely.
created enormous
So,
value for their
Absolutely.
shareholders and are very, very respected.
By the way,
There is a way of
Anjali,
building.
I must also compliment Mr. Pai and Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Pai has been an investor in helping start so many VC funds, right?
Mhm.
I just spoke to him on a phone call, and he committed money to me when I was raising my fund. And similarly, Kamlesh Bhai has helped Lending Card and Loan Tap with their first institutional lender, right? And he's helped so many NBFCs to start, right? So, privileged to share the stage. We don't have a
Thank
stage,
you.
of course. Privileged to share the
The
Zoom call.
virtual one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Bye bye.
Thank you.